the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe. For the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Don't dive into strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie, examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, plans in our hands, progress where every voice stands. In the progress, from the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Strong and keen. Tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe of team. Stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress. Time to end our discussion. Let's support one another.
This is Quincy Anderson. You know I love my country. There's no other country better than mine. Welcome to Guyana, land of 6 races, 6 different faces, and we all live in love. Guyana is a beautiful country, no other can compare. Got everything right here, so no other can compare. Guyana is made up of so many natural resources. We don't need no forces, cause we got enough resources. Let's talk about bauxite, gold, diamond, and rice. We got it right here. Guyana ain't going nowhere. We got enough oil too. One Guyana, I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I call home. One Guyana, I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I call home. Hey, hey, Guyana is nice, Guyana is fun, Guyana is clean, Guyana is green, Guyana got oil, Guyana got gold, Guyana got young and Guyana got old. I ain't talking no more. Guyana got things, we growing wings and developing things. The government real and that's a big deal. I'm singing from my heart, Guyana. I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I call home. One Guyana. I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I call home. Welcome to Guyana, land of 6 races, 6 different faces, and we all live in love. Guyana is a beautiful country, no other can compare. got everything right here, so no other can compare. Guyana is made up of so many natural resources. We don't need no forces, cause we got enough resources. Let's talk about bauxite, gold, diamond, and rice. We got it right here. Guyana ain't going nowhere. We got enough oil to one Guyana. I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I call home. One Guyana. I love Guyana. Guyana, my country, my home. The only place I...
In the heart of our nation, where voices collide, we're breaking down the policies with truth as our guide. With clarity on the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe. For the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands, exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa.
Good evening to you, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Agenda. We do apologize for being away from you guys so long, but nevertheless, as I said, myself and Joel, we got all the bugs worked out, and we are here with you guys from this Wednesday going forward. So good evening again, and welcome to another edition of Behind the Agenda, where we cut through the noise and dive deep into pressing issues shaping our nation. I am your host, as always, Cordell Jones, and tonight we have a packed discussion lined up. Firstly, we will take a hard look at the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. Every year, this ranking makes headlines, but how credible is it? Is it truly reflective of reality, or is it a flawed metric that fails to capture the full picture? Joel will break down the methodology behind the index and what it really means for Guyana. Next, we shift to Budget 2025. While the budget debates are over, we didn't get a chance to do a full analysis of Budget 2025. Tonight, Joel will take us through his expert breakdown of the numbers. What are the key macroeconomic issues? What we as Guyanese should be paying attention to, and how does Budget 2025 set the stage for growth in Guyana for the year 2025 and beyond? Then we turn our attention to the foreign exchange market. Economist Ramesh Gampat recently argued that the FX constraints we're seeing are due to the stagnant growth of the non-oil exports. Is that the case? And if so, what needs to be done to diversify our economy beyond oil? We'll unpack his argument and weigh in on solutions this evening. Of course, we have to talk about oil and gas. Now, Kaiju News recently published a report claiming that Suriname citizens have been given the option to invest in their first oil project, unlike Guyanese. The publisher of Kaiju News has even gone as far as to say that Suriname is taking care of its citizens better than Guyana. But is this claim accurate? And what's the real deal behind Suriname's oil model? And how does this compare to our own? Tonight, we get the facts straight. Stay with us as we break down these details and more. No spin, no distraction, just facts and expert analysis on this edition of Behind the Agenda. Join me in welcoming on screen our expert here, Joel Bagwedin. Joel, good evening. Welcome to the program. Thank you for being here.
Good evening again. Good evening, Cordell. Good evening to your viewers. And it's good to be back here after uh, a sabbatical.
Yes. So, Joel, first of all, let's get right into it. Now, Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. How credible is this index, if at all?
Uh, According to me, it's not credible at all. And I know that, politicians, particularly the opposition, has been using this index and their apologists year over year, year after year, they've been using this index to paint a certain picture of the country.
Right.
And so I did some very basic fact checks on their own website to understand what are the drivers of the index, how the index is compiled, and more importantly, who are the financiers of this organization.
Mm,
Now, commonsensically, when you want to know where the position of an organization or a group of people or individuals, where their positions are coming from, you just got to find out who's funding them.
mm,
And that tells you, and that will tell you, give you some insight into that. So before I go there, let's let's look at the methodology first of all.
okay.
The methodology of the index, according to its own report, the Transparency International report, it is not a scientific methodology. It is not a methodology that I would say that is trustworthy. It is essentially a methodology of compiling opinions of persons.
Mm,
And in Guyana, we know who those usual suspects are. It's the same set of people every year that whose opinion feeds into that perception index. So that's the first thing.
right.
Not based on any sort of proper empirical analysis on the actual state of affairs in terms of corruption and our anti-corruption framework.
Right.
And there is a vast difference between the actual state of affairs and a perception. Unfortunately, a lot of persons rely on this perception. So that's the first thing. The second thing, again, on their own website, and anybody could fact check this as we speak. If you go to Transparency International website, go through the website and then go and look for who funds the organ, who are the financiers, or what are the source or sources of funds to the
Mm,
organization. And you will find interestingly that, and they only have data. I mean, this is a Transparency International organization, and their data is dated. They have data up to 2021. So this is 2021. We are in 2025. But I estimate based on 2021, you have about 60% of their funding comes from governments.
mm,
Imagine by now it's more than 60%. I would estimate, rather, not imagine, I would estimate that their funding from governments is more than 60%. As of 2021, 60% of the organization's financial resources comes from governments. And it is a total of 14 countries that finance this organization.
Right.
Those countries include Denmark, um, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, uh, the UK, France, 14 countries. I'm just naming a few on top of my head. But you go on the website, it's there, you'll see 14 countries that finance this organization. What I find even more interesting, if you want to look at the scores for those 14 countries that finances this organization, somehow they score above 65. They
Oh,
scored higher, above 65. All right.
right.
And Denmark, which is one of the countries that finances the organization, they scored the highest, 90. Now, it is reasonable to presume that Denmark is a large contributor, right? It's
Yeah.
not unreasonable to make that assertion. They have to be a large contributor. So that's the second thing. The methodology of the index is one that is not scientific or based on any sort of empirical data analysis to ascertain the actual status of corruption or an assessment of the anti-corruption framework. And two, the funding sources comes from about 60% of it comes from governments. And all these governments, these are countries, 14 of them, that obtain scores above 65. And I want to pay particular attention, special attention to Denmark.
Mm.
Denmark scored the highest. Now, Denmark is a member of the OECD. And the OECD is an organization that, according to the US State Department website, that was formed, it constitutes 37 democracies. And that organization sets standards and policies for those countries to adopt. 37 democracies that are market based economies. And so that body sets standards. And by virtue of being a member of that body or that organization, then you are obligated as a country to implement those standards because you signed on to that. And your policies and your laws and regulations and so on, you have to, you're obligated to adopting those and
Mm.
implementing them. Now, the Transparency International is not a body that sets standards or set policies. It is not any sort of recognized, internationally recognized uh, body that would set international best practice standards for country to adopt. Not by way of UN convention or any other convention. They just exist. I don't know for what purpose. Perhaps to create confusion in the world with these countries and to maybe give countries that don't finance them a bad perception score with the intention of extracting monies from them, which is a form of extortion, by the way.
Right.
So coming back to Denmark and the OECD, I'm making reference to this because the OECD actually conducted an actual assessment
Right.
that country's anti-corruption framework. And that assessment is not based on perception. That assessment is based on a factual analysis,
Mm.
factual assessment of that country. And so you would be amazed at what I'm about to tell you. That assessment, in summary, as of 2024, in their 2024 Outlook report, anti-corruption outlook report for Denmark by the OECD, says that Denmark has only met 7%, 7% of the standard of the anti-corruption strategic framework standard set by the OECD, 7%.
Wow. So how they get such a high rated?
Whereas, well, that's the difference between actuality and perception.
Mm,
Difference between actuality slash reality and perception. And guess what is the average? Now remember, the OECD is a group of 37 countries.
right.
The average rate of implementation and adoption of the OECD standard is 46%. The average 46%, which means some countries are higher, some countries are below the average, some countries just within the average. The OECD is 7%, way below the average, way below the average. More than 30 percentage points, 39 percentage points below the average. That is terrible.
Right.
So we can summarize that now to say the story of that assessment that I've done is that the Transparency International Corruption Index could never be credible because what we have found evidently, based on the assessment that I have performed, is that countries such as Guyana, that is given a score that suggests corruption perception is the highest,
Right.
the actuality is that the actual in an actual sense, it is not that high compared to a country like Denmark, where according to that index, Denmark is perceived to be the least corrupt country in the world, but in reality, it is actually the most corrupt country in the world,
Mm,
at least most corrupt than Guyana
right.
in
Right.
reality. Because if you look at our assessments on our anti-corruption framework done vis-a-vis the CFATF and FATF bodies, we have made marked improvements over the year in our anti-corruption framework. Marked improvements. So we've been improving, we've not been declining. We've been making consistent improvements, and of course, over the years, consistent improvements towards strengthening our legal framework as well as the institutional framework of these anti-corruption agencies. So there's a huge difference between reality and perception,
Mm,
as I have demonstrated, and anybody could go and do this verification for themselves, and you'd find that according to the Transparency International, Denmark, that is supposed to be the least corrupt country in the world, is actually one of the most corrupt country in the world in
mm,
reality.
yeah. Wow. Now, Joel, let me take you over to Budget 2025. As the viewers will remember, we had some technical difficulties as we were about to dissect Budget 2025. The budget has been passed. Nevertheless, can we dive into your budget analysis that you usually publish each year? And what are some of the key macroeconomic issues that you would like to address?
All right, so thank you. So I'll try to be as brief as possible
Yeah.
because I don't want to represent the budget.
Right.
I don't want to represent the budget. So what I will do, I want to show the at a basic level, I want to highlight the increase in allocation in the various in critical sectors
Mm,
that aligns to the government's objective. And then as we progress in this program over the coming weeks and so on, we will then delve into each thematic area, each sector in terms of the outcome of those investments,
right.
because it will be too much to go through in a 1 hour program. So today we just look I just will do cover a highlight of what the expenditure looks like, what the allocation look like, how those have increased over the years,
Right.
and some other issues therein, right? So I
Right.
won't go too heavy in it. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that, which has been an issue of contention in the public domain, is the financing of the budget.
Right.
The budget, point to note, is financed from 38% of mainly tax revenues, and the withdrawal from the natural resource fund accounts for 33%. Debt financing accounts for 23%, and other sources such as credit inflows from carbon credit sales and other sources account for about 6%. Now, the point of emphasis here, or the story with those numbers here, is that while there is this perception created by some folks that we're earning a huge amount of money from the oil resources and we're spending out all of the money,
Yeah.
the revenue that we collect from taxes, the non-oil revenue, remain the largest source of finance to the budget, 38%. Oil revenue is just 33%. So we're earning more from the non-oil economy. And that signals, that is indicative of the government's diversification economic strategy to diversify the non-oil economy, utilizing the monies from the that we earn from the oil sector to diversify the economy. That result is obtained as a result of that. Your non-oil economy is obviously expanding, as well as evidently expanding based on the resources that the non-oil sector generate. And
Right.
of course, that is also demonstrated vis-a-vis the non-oil growth in GDP, which is 13%.
Right.
So these are not numbers that somebody in the Bureau of Statistics pull out of the sky. These numbers tell a certain story, and this is what I want to focus on, the story of the numbers. And then in other programs, we will get into integrated detail in analyzing the impact and the outcome, etc., etc. Right? So that's the first highlight I want to point out. Then in the social services sector, another area of contention that the opposition always want to make a case that government is not doing enough in the social services sector. We're spending too much on road and bridges, too much on infrastructure. But if you look at the resources in the social services sector, the social services sector budget accounts for 31% of the total budget,
Mm.
with an average year-on-year growth of 88%. So the average increase in social services from 2020 to 2025 is 88% year on year.
Mm.
That is not negligible. That is significant increases we're talking about. The housing sector budget, which is part of the social services sector, the housing sector budget accounts for the largest share of the social services sector budget at 32%, followed by the health sector, 28%, education, 23%, and social services, 14%, culture and sports, 3%. That is the composition of the social services sector with the various subsectors in that. And the social services sector is made up of the housing sector, the housing drive, water, etc., across the
Mm.
country, the healthcare sector, the social services, things like pension, the cash grants, etc., right? The public assistance. So of the total social services budget, 31%, and I've given you the composition of it and how much each one of these areas account for.
Right.
31% is not little bit of money. Of a $1.4 trillion budget, 31% of of 1.4 trillion is not a little bit, is not a small amount of money. So that's the second highlight I want to point out. Then the third area of focus that the government highlights is regional development. The government has said that we are going to spend more on regional development and that they're paying more attention to each region, taking into account the inherent unique attributes, features, characteristics of each region, and tailor a regional development plan.
Right.
Let's look at the regional development budget. The budgetary allocation towards regional development has also increased by 88%, or from $50 billion in 2020 to $94 billion in 2025. So from 50, that's nearly 90% increase in 5 years in regional development, from 50 to $94 billion in 2025. Point to note as well, that is just the allocation to the regional sectors. You still have spend from central government, from other ministries' budget
Right.
that will be expended. So that is just the regional allocation in the budget. But on top of that, you will also have spend from infrastructure, public infrastructure budget into the regional development sectors as well. So in actuality, if you go through the budget and identify all the other um, identified spend outside of the regional allocation for those region by region, it will be more than $94 billion.
Right. Right.
So that's the third point I want to highlight. Now, let's now turn to the infrastructure sector. The infrastructure sector has increased, and I'm looking at from for the 5 year period, 2020 to 2025. The infrastructure sector has increased nearly sevenfold, from 46 billion in 2020 to 313 billion in 2025. And that is broken down into different subsectors as well. In the economic sector, the budgetary allocations rose from 19.2 billion in 2020 to 76.2 billion in 2025. That is an increase of 297%.
Wow.
That tells you that government in the infrastructure sector, in the economic subsector of that sector, they're investing more in the economic sectors such as agriculture to expand the productive output, the productive capacity of the economy. And this is important as part of your diversification strategy, which, as I've demonstrated earlier, that has so far been yielding positive results. And that is not the real thing as yet that we're getting, the real full potential, the full results of these investments over the last 5 years is yet to come in the medium term. But at least, although it is yet to come in the medium term, because there's always something called a time lag in economic analysis and economic policy. There's a
Right.
time lag between when you implement the policy and between when the desired outcome of that policy is manifested or is realized. It takes time. Take, for example, the gas to energy. We've been investing in the gas to energy since 2021, and we're still investing. It's not realized as yet. It will realize until after the end, by the end of 2025. So after 5 years, then the benefits
Right.
that investment will be realized. So that you have a lag of about 5 6 years, right? The same thing applies to every policy that one implements, even the tax policies. It takes time to see the results of those, etc. So I just
Right.
want to make that point, because there is this expectation in our society. We're spending so much money every year. Where is this money going? Where is the result? What we have seen here, or what I'm demonstrating here, is there are results, tangible results, but this is not the full thing as yet. This is only the tip, but we're seeing gradual, tangible results
Right.
in those policies. So moving on to that, when we talk about the social services sectors already, the infrastructure spend in the social services sector, it's about $80 billion in 2020, which has now gone up to 369.4 billion in 2025. And in the public order and safety sector, the budgetary allocation rose from 43.2 billion in 2020 to
Mm.
$109 billion. Now, that is all I want to highlight in terms of budgetary allocations, highlighting key sectors. I now want to go into some macroeconomic issues.
Right.
For example, this whole thing about the debt sustainability, and this notion that if we're earning so much money from oil, why are we still borrowing money to finance the budget? And some persons in some quarters are saying that, if we had a renegotiated oil contract, we would need to borrow. Now that is at best a misconception. Debt, the issuance of debt and the creation of debt, that is how you create it. That is how you create wealth. That is how you increase the money supply. If you don't have the creation of debt, there will be no increase in the money supply. And if you don't have any increase in the money supply, then there will be no increase in wealth. There
Mm.
will be no increase in income. There will be no increase in productive output. There will be no increase in social welfare and your standard of living,
Right.
and improvement in quality of life. So this thing about debt, that we shouldn't have debt, is a misconception. We don't understand how economies work, and monetary policies, and fiscal policies, and so on. So you have to have some level of debt. There is no country in the world that doesn't have debt.
Right.
The question is, though, what do you do with the debt? Do we create debt to consume, or do we create debt to invest and expand productivity, to expand production, productive output? And that is where the argument is missing. And this is where this explains why we have to invest in the infrastructure sector, because it is in the infrastructure sector that expands the economy and non-oil economy, that in turn will generate more wealth, more income, more streams of income, more
Mm.
streams of revenue and profitability, which in turn will will grow the prosperity of the country, which in turn will grow the wealth of the country collectively. Country meaning the people, household level, farm level, as well as the government, the state level, in terms
Right.
of collecting more revenues in taxes and other sources. So that is where you have to devote your spending in expanding the productive sectors. So it doesn't matter how much money we earn from oil, it will still not be enough when you look at the needs of the country. And if I'm to put it in this context, if you take a development economy context, take the United States or the United Kingdom,
Mm.
those countries that are in their advanced stage of development those countries have a long history of existence, 300 years of history. 300 years. We are only 60 years old post independence. 60 years old post independence. And half of that time, instead of we go up, we went down. Half of that 60 years, we went down.
Right.
We went from here to here. So we had a long period of regression. So that is why when persons take Singapore, for example, when Guyana and Singapore gained independence, we were around the same level in terms of GDP and per capita GDP. But Singapore went here in 50 years, and Guyana went here in opposite directions. And the reason for that is because of the political state, the differences in the political state of the two countries, differences in the two countries' history. We have a very different history, a very different political environment, and the result in terms of the state of these two countries, in the case of Guyana, 30 years we went down. We went from maybe one of the richest countries in the region at the time when we gained independence, to one of the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. at the end by 1992, right? After nearly 30 years. So we've had the other 30 years that brought it to where we are today. We had to focus on rebuilding now. And this is where we are today, rebuilding.
Yeah.
So we are, from post-independence context, we are 30 years behind development. In a global context, we are 300 years behind advanced economies. So how do you expect us to catch up with these countries that took 300 years to attain where they are? How do you expect us to get that done in 4 years? And then from a local context, how do you expect us to catch up 60 years development in 30 years? You had a 30-year setback. So this is how I'm framing the analysis within these contextual views, because this is the reality that we have to often be reminded of. This is the reality that we have to often be reminded of. It's not a magic wand. You just pick up a magic wand and things happen overnight. All right.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, coming back to the macroeconomic issues, coming back to this whole thing about debt, and the opposition said that the debt burden increase on the household. Now, this thing about debt burden in terms of the perspective that the debt burden is born is incurred by the household. You have to understand the policy. So the notion that the debt burden per household is increased and would have to be borne by the household would only be true if that increase in debt burden is accompanied by increase in taxes. Is that the case? No. That was the case in the 2015-2020 period when the APNU EFC, when they increased the debt burden. They increased the debt burden by over 300,000 per household, more than 300,000 per household. And that increase in debt burden, in their case, was accompanied by increase in taxes. They increased taxes.
Right.
They add VAT on a whole range, over 300 items, as the Minister of Finance so eloquently enumerated in his presentation in their own appendix, that the increased fees and rates and taxes add VAT onto items that were never there before. 300 odd items. So in their case, when they talk about increasing that burden on the household, it is true because it was accompanied by increase in taxes and fees and the cost of doing business, and in terms of the burden on the imposed at the household level, VAT on electricity and VAT on water, etc. In our case, in the case of the PPPC administration, that increase in debt burden is offset by tax reliefs.
Right.
The burden is not transferred. You have tax relief, so there is increase in disposable income. You have to increase in the tax threshold, so lower taxes. The rate has been lowered, and then you have all the cost of living measures, the fiscal measures, the keeping the excise tax on fuel from 50%
Right.
to
Yeah.
0, and that whole range of other fiscal measures, while increasing a range of other policy measures to increase disposable income, increasing pension, increasing public assistance, increasing the cash grant to the students, the
Right.
children. You have the national cash grant, and as well as increase in wages, accompanied with a whole range of other such tax relief, foregone revenue to the treasury. That translate to over $324 billion in subsidy per household,
Wow.
right? Which works out to about $2 million per household in subsidy. So that is the reality. The increase in the debt burden is only in nominal terms, it is offset by relief, tax relief and subsidies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one macroeconomic issue that I want to touch on. Now, before I get into the others, some of these things I'm imagining we may have to leave for the next program. How are we doing with time?
Yeah, we got about 15 minutes left.
We got about 15 minutes left. Let me see which other. So let's talk about income. Let's look about uh, net disposable income. Now, net disposable income. We went through the range of policy measures, increase in taxes. With the changes to the income tax rate, your effective tax on personal income has now moved from 28%. Effective tax has moved from 28% down to 17%. What has that resulted to? Now, when you look at the budget estimates, you have in there the breakdown for the tax revenue, company taxes, personal income, PAYE, etc., self-employed, etc. And from that, if you know the effective tax rate, you can mathematically solve an equation to calculate your net disposable income, calculate gross income, and then subtract the gross income from the taxes, and you get net disposable income. So I did that calculation. I'm explaining the calculation because I want the viewers to understand that these are not numbers I just pluck out of the air.
Right.
You can, a high school student could do this. This is basic mathematics, nothing complicated. So I'm pointing you in the direction where to find the data and how I perform the calculation, which is very simple mathematics. And so with the calculation using the income tax data and the effective tax rate, the changes in effective tax rate, net disposable income in 2014 was $71.6 billion. $71.6 billion. By the end of 2024, net disposable income moved from 71 points. Hold on, let me go back. Let me give you some other periods for the benefit of the viewers. So we look at 2014, 71.6 billion. By the end of 2020, right? By the end of 2020, a net disposable income, or maybe I should give you 2019. By the end of 2019, net disposable income was 118 billion. So it moved from nearly 72 billion in 2014 to 118 billion at the end of 2019. And in 2020, it went up to 127 billion. By the end of 2024, net disposable income, personal income, went up to 278.3 billion.
Wow.
278.3 billion. That is as a result of the government policy, economic policies of the government in terms of creating employment, expanding the economy, creating opportunities, increasing income, investing in our people so our people become more competitive, etc. And guess where that is projected to be in 2025? 415.7 billion. That is the projections of 2025. From 278 in 24 to 416 billion in 2025. And that is just what is captured in the tax bracket. That excludes all those maybe 100,000 persons who fell off the tax bracket, who will be on the um, within the tax threshold and will not have to pay taxes.
Right.
My estimation, that's another maybe 30, 40 billion dollars in income annually. So you're looking at 400 and maybe 50 billion dollars in personal income annually as
Wow.
of this year. That's
Wow.
a massive increase. And this is actual data. This is not plucking it out of the air. So when people talk about, oh, where is this money? What is government doing with this money? How is the people benefiting? We've looked at income, In other programs, we will look at housing, we will look at agriculture, we will look at all the other sectors, etc. I'll focus only on these areas. I don't want to overload. I don't want to overload the viewers with too much information in this one program. So let me pause here for now. We probably have maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes remaining. So let me pause here and
Yeah, we're running out of time. We'd have to jump back into the budget in another program. But before we go, I want to take your attention over to the foreign exchange markets for a little bit. Now, Ramesh Gampad has argued in his latest letter to the editor that the reason for the um, forex constraints in the foreign exchange market is because of stagnant growth of non-oil exports. What's your take on this?
so quickly his analysis is flawed. I mean, for a very seasoned economist of his caliber, I'm disappointed that he's looked at it in such a narrow manner. You have to understand the sources of inflows and outflows of foreign exchange. Now, foreign exchange in an open economy like ours, number one, you have to earn it. You want your main source to be from earnings, vis-a-vis export earnings. And so that's why we have to invest in diversifying, expanding, becoming more nationally competitive, etc. It comes from inflows from external borrowings. It comes from transfers, foreign direct investment, capital inflows, and of course you have foreign exchange gains, etc., from investments, the country, the banking sector investments, private sector investments in international markets or other instruments. So income from investments. So there are multiple sources of foreign exchange inflows as well as outflows. Outflows, you got to pay for imports, you got to service your debt, external debt. Uh, Foreign investors repatriate their profit, etc. So it you can't only look at your current account balance, which is the account that captures our international trade, exports and import.
Right.
You have to look at the balance of payment account. The current account is just is part of the balance of payment account. The balance of payment account comprises your current account balance as well as your capital account. And so that is what you have to look at. And so you have to look at your balance of payment, uh, overall balance, and not just your current account. Because those things that he mentioned, oh, that 75, 85% of the money from the oil goes out back. We don't get it. It's not in our GDP. It's a half-baked analysis. He doesn't understand the intricacies of the industry. So your balance of payment account captures all of that. It captures the inflow in the oil and gas sector as well as the outflow. Now, the thing about this 85% thing, which is the cost, oil and the oil company's profit, it is not really an outflow that doesn't come back into the economy.
Right.
But the oil companies are still investing in future developments. So that cost, oil and their share of profit, does not go to Exxon's shareholder or their parent company. It comes right back into the economy in developing, financing the future developments in the Stabroek block. Only until all the developments are fully financed and recovered, then is when you will have outflows going back to the parent company. But
Okay.
as of this moment, they're still investing. They're still investing. So the balance of payment captures all of that. And if you analyze the balance of payment, overall balance, you will find that the balance of payment has been recording a surplus balance consecutively, except for 1 year. In the last 5 years, 1 year it recorded a deficit. And even when it recorded that deficit, our central bank reserve was able to finance that deficit. And if you look at it over the last 30 years, since 1992, when we were bankrupt, we had to get balance of payment support. And that is vis-a-vis the debt write-off, the debt forgiveness, debt restructuring to support our balance of payment, as well as for a couple of years we had balance of payment financing support from the IMF. But after we recovered and we gained stability by 2006, we no longer had IMF support, and so our domestic economy was and the balance of payment deficits were financed from the central bank. So and right now where the balance of payment is collecting us is deriving surplus balances. So
Right.
that notion about stagnant non-oil exports and so on is flawed from that perspective. The second point to note is that to really ascertain whether you have a foreign exchange constraint, there is a certain indicator that you look at, and that indicator is how much foreign assets, net foreign assets and reserve do we have to cover Im- our imports? And as a rule of thumb, your minimum benchmark is 3 months import cover, meaning you need to have at least 3 months worth of imports in reserve.
Right.
And when you do that analysis, we have been in excess of 3 months over the last 5 years, as high as 8 months. So we are way above the we're way above the minimum benchmark of 3 months. The average, according to my calculations over the last 5 years, was 7.14 months. So we're more than double the minimum. We have more than double the minimum requirement in terms of reserve, foreign exchange reserve, and net foreign assets to service our domestic demand for foreign exchange in terms of paying for imports, etc.
Right.
So empirically, the numbers does not support the view that we have a foreign exchange constraint, right? At the
Yeah.
macro level.
Yeah. No, I'm looking at the time here. I don't even know whether to start you on this island gas here. No, in the oil and gas area, Kaiser News reported on the 7th of February, I think it was, um, Suriname is given the option to invest in their forest oil project. Subsequently, the publisher, Glenn Lal, argued that Suriname is taking care of its citizens, unlike Guyana, by allowing them to invest in their oil. Now, for the benefit of the audience, just share with us the deal and what he is referring to, some of the pros and cons.
So how much time we have left? Let me know how quickly I have to summarize this.
You can't do it. You got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, so 3 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, in every deal, there is what you call the fine print,
Right.
or the devil is in the details. Ask these persons what is the fine print, or what is, let's go into the details to find the devil. And this thing, I saw persons even in the private sector, some private sector colleagues got excited about this thing and were saying that it's a model, it's a viable model, it's a viable tool, you know, in as a substitute to multilateral agencies, borrowing, and so on. So let me explain what is a bond. A bond is a debt financing instrument. The different types of debt financing instruments. You have bond, commercial papers, etc., and you have bank loans.
Right.
The first thing to note is that a bond is costlier than a bank loan. And that is because, one, it has a longer maturity period. It typically has a longer maturity period than a bank loan. And two, interest is paid on the face value. So if the bond is for 250 million US with a maturity period of 10 years, then the interest is calculated on 250 million US paid annually until the date of maturity.
Okay.
In the case of a loan is repaid in fixed payments on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, and it is made up of blended payments whereby the principal balance is reduced. And the interest is not compound interest. Interest is calculated on a reducing balance method.
Right.
So over time, as you reduce your principal balance, you pay less interest. So in the long run, a loan costs less than a bond. So that's the first thing. So whether it's a viable tool for the issuer of the bond, the answer is no. It's more expensive for the issuer than a loan, than other alternative sources of financing or instruments of financing. The second thing is, if you read the report carefully, the bond is to refinance two old bonds, two existing bonds on the books of Statutory. Those bond, when I look at the financial statement, the balance sheet is about 190 million US. So about 70% of the bonds to be raised, 250 million in US dollars and another 50 million in euro dollars. About 70% of the proceeds from the bond will be used to refinance these old bonds.
Okay.
When you have to refinance a debt, it means that you have defaulted on that debt. It means that you have defaulted. And when I research it, there is a Bloomberg article that confirms that the old bond was in default for 3 years.
Wow.
So default means the investors who invested in that bond were not being paid their interest, much less their principal investment. So that's not a good sign. So that's the first sign that this is not a good investment. It is you have to understand the risks associated with this bond.
Right.
One, it is to refinance the proceeds, 70% or more of the proceeds is to refinance. The third thing is that this bond is to, so according to their fiscal terms, their production sharing agreement, Statsoli could invest 20%, take 20% stake. So this bond, the remainder of the balance after the refinancing the old bonds, is to represent their 20% stake in the Block 58. That now, according to the news, according to the authorities, that is so far been reported in the public domain, public knowledge, is that oil production is expected to commence by 2028. So the third thing is that this bond is to be repaid from future revenue, which is uncertain.
Right.
Now, here's the fourth thing. The fourth thing is that, and this is now industry knowledge that I'm privy to, that the public is not privy to, or the authorities did not make it known to the public. Industry knowledge suggests that I'm privy to that there has not yet been a final investment decision. And the reason for that, it has been deferred. It is public knowledge that that final investment decision has been deferred. But what the public don't know is the reason for that, which I'm privy to from the industry. The reason for that is because the fiscal terms that Suriname has not been settled. It is still in negotiation.
Okay.
In other words, the oil company in that block is, which I believe is Total or whichever the company is, the oil company is demanding more favorable terms. Now, the official news from the authority is that they have a better deal than Guyana. But they didn't report that the oil company and make a decision as yet because they're demanding more favorable terms. And here's the fifth thing. You're not going to have that decision anytime soon because this year is an election year for Suriname.
Okay.
So until after the election, then you're going to get a decision subject to negotiation. Subject to negotiation. So here you have Statsoli is raising this bond, inviting citizens to invest with all these fancy things that sounds good and sounds nice, fancy interest rate. But the basis upon which this bond has to be repaid, there is no investment decision. You have an election, so which means you're not going to have The longer you take to reach a final investment decision, it means production will be delayed. And then you don't know where oil price will be by 2028. So there is that
Right.
uncertainty. And then the president, if he's re-elected, he has already committed that he's paying out 700 US dollars or 750 US dollars. And he know the money is there, right? So he's promising to pay citizens to invest to earn 7% in interest. And he done pay out 400 million US of money that he didn't earn yet that has to go and repay this bond. So you see how much risk associated with this thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
See how much risk associated with it? Contrast that with us. For our future blocks, our auction that we had a new production sharing agreement, new fiscal terms. Those fiscal terms are settled. The new fiscal terms are settled. The oil companies are now, we said this is what we're going with. It remains internationally competitive. The oil companies that participated accepted those terms, in contrast to the situation in Suriname, which their authorities have not reported. They're hiding from the public. I happen to know this because of my association with the industry.
Right.
Right?
Joel, thank you for breaking that down for us. And thank you for being here to give us the behind the scenes knowledge on what's going on. Guys, we'll be here next Wednesday with more information. And I guess Joel will expand more on budget 2025 and what we need to look for and how the plans and the policies and the allocations will benefit Guyanese in 2025 and beyond. Joel, thank you for being here with us this
Thank you.
evening. Thank you to all the viewers who have tuned in this evening. Thank you for the continued support. We'll ensure that we're here every week going forward. And from myself, thank you guys for joining. We'll see you here next week. Joel, take care. Viewers, thank you for being here. And until next time, Cordell Jones saying bye for now.
Don't dive the key down, don't you keep. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll see